Hey everybody, hope you are enjoying this season of Advent as we anticipate the celebration of our Lord's birth. This is Tim Austin, and I'm the host of this show, and I'm also the founder and managing coach at EncompassLifeCoaching.com. What do you do when vision collides with unmet expectations? Holding on to a vision, as our guest will share today, can sometimes feel like holding a tiger by the tail. When so much about living in uncertain times and places is focused on survival, how can we keep the vision alive and not neglect the people most important to us? These are real questions not only for cross-cultural workers, they are universal concerns for anyone desiring to maintain a healthy work-life balance. My guest today is David Lovett. Dave and his wife Pam were one of the first global worker families that me and my family connected with when we first landed in Central Asia back in 1996. To be precise, it was Thanksgiving Day of 96 when we arrived in Tajikistan. Back to unmet expectations. Tajikistan is both a place of happy surprises and unmet expectations. We experienced a mingling of the two throughout our 16 years of service there, and we experienced a lot of it side by side with Dave and Pam Lovett, doing life and ministry together. The conversation you're about to hear has come quite a few years after our families moved on from Central Asia, went our separate ways, and embarked on new adventures of our own. And while it may sound a bit like old friends reminiscing, you will also discover some key insights from our reflections together. Dave and Pam have served with Operation Mobilization for over 40 years in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Tajikistan, and Afghanistan, and are now leading OM's ministry in Iran, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. I invite you to read a more detailed bio of this very interesting couple in the show notes for today's episode. For now, let's dive into my conversation with my friend, Dave Lovett. Dave, it's great to have you on the show. I've been wanting this for a while, as you've seen, as you know, the string of emails that we've had together and trying to make this work. And here we are. We're in a conversation now. So I'm just thankful that we can chat today. So welcome.
Yeah, Tim, thank you so much. I appreciate your patience and persevering, and especially because we're old friends, coworkers. It's great to share together with you like this.
It is. Yeah, we could spend all day or a long weekend reminiscing, I'm sure. Just even before the call here, we were reminiscing about life in Central Asia, and kind of could continue that on and talk a little bit about maybe reminisce a little, have a few questions to get us started. But tell us where you're at now and what you're doing.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again. I'm currently based here in the USA and have ministry responsibility with some other guys and a leadership team overseeing what we're calling West and Central Asia, but it's broadly speaking Turkic speaking world, Persian speaking world of South Asia. And so doing a lot in more of a support role, training, coaching, advising, supervising ministries, and trying to help, like your vision, raise up a new generation of young cross-cultural workers. So traveling probably 50-60% of my time over into that part of the world, the Middle East and Asia, and doing a lot virtually, especially with COVID right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. And we just to give a little context, we go back a ways, and from you, when did you first arrive in Central Asia? Give me that year, because I know it was several years before we did.
Well, and it's two parts for me. One is
that's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I first went out to Pakistan and started working with Afghans back in 1979. So I was only 23, single guy banging around out there, and then Pam and I, my wife, when we got married, we went back out in '83. And spent a couple of years eventually there in the Pakistan-Afghan border learning Persian, Afghan Persian.
Okay.
and then took a year off to do a master's at Wheaton in cross-cultural studies, and then went back 1991, 92, started to look at Central Asia or Tajikistan, as we so fondly remember.
Right. Okay. So yeah, and we arrived several years later, 4 or 5 years later, in Tajikistan. I think it was. Well, I vividly remember when we arrived because it was '96, Thanksgiving Day of '96. Now,
Right?
why?
Oh my goodness.
Okay. First tip for uh, um, those who feel called to the field and are wanting to make it a good transition. Try not to leave on the holidays, or try not to land in your new location on Christmas or Thanksgiving or something like that. We could have easily stayed and spent some time with family back here in California before we got on the plane to go to our first assignment, which happened to be the assignment which we had for 16 years in Tajikistan. But how much I just remember landing there, and our colleagues who worked closely with you at the NGO, Mike and David, picked us up and from the airport, dropped us off at the little guest apartment there, and that first night, even my wife and I were eating ramen noodles out of a bag, just trying to even find a way to heat water because we weren't familiar with the place, and watching tanks go up and down the main street
goodness.
there, and we're like, what did we get ourselves into? Crying in our noodles, and so that would be my first tip for those who are going. Try to time it a little better than we did. I think it probably would have been a little better if we would have waited. But you know how we are. We're excited. We're
right.
energized. We want to get to the place where we feel God is leading us and has called us. And so that's where we were at. And God, by his grace, but he was good. And so he helped us to stay even with kind of a bumpy start there. So tell me about,
didn't we not have you over for Thanksgiving meal?
That's the big question. I thought you might ask that. Did you not have us over? I could really hold this one over you. But you know what? Actually, there was an embassy Thanksgiving dinner that day, and I think all you guys were going to that. So everybody in the NGO were going to the U.S. Embassy Thanksgiving dinner. And we were like, we were dead. We had traveled for 3-4 days straight. Sure, and so actually we did get an invite. So, but we were like,
they're good.
No way. We just can't do this, No, not a good first impression.
No, I agree with your idea though of trying to be as practical as possible when you're flying and entering into a new country.
Yeah. So what was it like for you and Pam? Let's go to married life. What was it like for you and Pam and your first hitting the ground?
I mean, by the time we got to Tajikistan, we had already been in India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. So in a sense, some of the bumpy initial lessons that we had been trying to learn, I put it like that.
Right.
You think you've learned that we carried with us into Tajikistan. I think that I just had finished my master's in cross-cultural ministry, and so I came out with this whole new burst of idealism. When you're doing all those kind of studies and you're getting all this theory. So I had all my great theory again of how we're going to do it. Now we're going to do it right. We're really going to do this right. So I'd written a strategy paper, which I probably gave you copies of, and had this idea of, we're going to see the ministry accomplished like never before and seeing the kingdom of God come to the Tajik people. Yes. And we're going to multiplying fellowships of all the things that we're dreaming, and we're going to start an NGO, and we're going to start humanitarian work. And so we had a lot of the ideas were okay, and unfortunately, just before we get there, the Civil War breaks out, And
Mm.
so suddenly we arrive into a situation that's not what we planned on
Right.
at all.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we arrive in the capital city, and it literally was just like a ghost town. And there was not only no tanks, there were just burned
Mm.
out buildings, burned out cars. It was just a couple weeks after the fighting had stopped, and we didn't have internet back then, so I just did
Hmm.
not know how bad it was. And um, so we were, as you said, totally exhausted,
Yeah.
and um, we arrived, and I had rented a house that so it would all be set up. And I get to the house, Rigonda, you remember that place?
Oh, yeah.
And I get there, and it's full of refugees with their cows. So I get there, and I'm like, oh, we can't stay here. I mean, I can't kick all these people out. So I've left a single guy with our luggage at the airport. I put Pam into a bedroom. Grab a taxi, and I said, okay, so what are we going to do? So I went to the local hotel, Tajikistan, found somebody there I recognized, and I said, hey, do you know Jeff Paulson? Do you know Jeff? Oh, yeah, I know him. The only American I knew. Where does he live? Well, he lives up in a place called Vadanasos in the northern part of the city. And I said, anything else, like an address? Nope, no. He just lives up there somewhere. So I grab my daughter Rachel. I get in the taxi. We start. I just pray, Lord, make Jeff come out of his house when I get there. So I
Hmm.
turn down one road. There's nobody. I turn down the next road. Nobody. Turn down the third road. Nobody. The fourth turn on Lutfi, there's Jeff walking down the street. So I jump out of the taxi. Hey, Jeff, we're here. All that to be said, um,
Yeah.
it was, I would just say that one thing I can say is that I'm constantly amazed at God's mercy and how gracious He is and faithful in spite of our impracticalities and our idealism
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you know go,
Yeah.
so
A lot
so
of
we
it's
got
getting,
there.
yeah, a lot of it's getting the timing right, isn't it? And sometimes, and of course, God sees the big picture. But fast forward 4 or 5 years when we landed, well, that vision came to fruition. You already had an NGO established, and because of that, we could come in. Other global workers could come under that umbrella, and
Yeah.
it was, like you say, the grace of God and the timing of God, I think, in terms of bringing all that together.
Yeah, I mean, I just see God's grace was there. So I looked at Jeff and said, "Jeff, I need a house," and he literally said, "Well, turn around behind you. That house is open." So I looked at him and said, "Please tell the owner I'll be back in 3 hours," and we moved in.
Mm.
And and I think over those in that first, I one thing I guess Tim I look back on is from the very beginning the amazing hospitality of Tajik people
Mm.
was something that both of us we learned to appreciate because
Hmm.
without all the Tajiks' help coming in there, I mean, we didn't know anything. And then when the Civil War was going on, and I had a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old,
Yeah.
and even simple things like finding eggs, I literally looked around the city for 2 days to find eggs or to find milk. But the Tajiks' friends would bring it to us.
Yeah.
They'd come over
Yeah.
even when
Wow.
there was a curfew at night. So I think looking back, one of the things I just appreciate so much was the warmth and the hospitality and help of Tajiks and friends that we
Hmm.
had there.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. There's always those things that we just come to love, and the things we learn to value in a host culture like Tajikistan. And I hear it again and again, the hospitality. What are one or two other things that you just loved about Central Asia, the Tajiks, that you maybe even to this day miss?
I think that, and you know this because you lived in there. The word hospitality. I like what somebody said. It's kind of the love language out there,
Right.
and people genuinely were friends. People would just stop over. You could hang out. I used to say I could step out in the front of my house and then start talking to people for a couple of hours, and usually get invited for tea or invite them
Right.
into my house,
Mm-hmm.
So the people are so friendship and relationship oriented, and not as much the clock. I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
against being time oriented either. There's a place for that. But, it's like one Tajik friend once said, he said, you guys, you all have watches, but you have no time.
Mm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think the willingness people had they would bend over backwards. They would
Yeah.
stop. And
That's good.
the friendship was a really, really valued part of our
Yeah,
lives.
I agree completely with that. And that was our experience too. And then on the family level, just the environment. And it's really hard to explain this to some of our friends from the West, but just the environment was so conducive to raising a family. And what I mean by that is that because of that, like you're saying, the emphasis on relationships, time together, that bled over into our family life, I think, and influenced us in a positive way. We weren't always perfect at it. I worked too much sometimes, but I do feel like it had a positive impact on us. And I miss that part of Central Asian life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the food. I mean, Tajik food is just, you understand.
The naan, in itself, our house was right by a naan cellar. And so you'd get those hot naans and you have to juggle them as you're walking down the street because they're just so too hot to handle. But our kids just loved that. And that's just so simple, but we miss it a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my kids would bend over backwards and eat out of our hands to get that naan again.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, let's go to kind of lessons learned. What are three things? It doesn't have to be three things. One or two or three. Just what are a couple things that you wish you would have known during your first several years on the field, first 2 or 3 years? What are one or two things you wish you would have known? This can be from when you started, even before Tajikistan.
Some of the lessons, whether it was the beginning years in India and Bangladesh or coming to Tajikistan, I think I kept learning them, or I kept trying to learn them. It's hindsight, as we say, is 2020, and nowadays I'm going back to younger leaders thinking about this a lot and trying to give some advice and coaching and saying, hey guys, if I could do it again, I would do it differently. And I think that, and some of it's our personalities. We are, and as organizations, we're very task oriented. We're very vision driven, goal driven. And, we breathe that. Right. And yet, and I can think over the years, I would have, churches, donors, supporters, my own organization banging on my door for reports or for whatever it is that they wanted. And I used to say, but my kids wouldn't do that. My kids, they would, it's not that they wouldn't come and talk and say, hey, Daddy, I want this or that. But, adults are in my face, how it is. And sometimes I think I used to say vision is great, except it can be like a tiger by the tail, that some things that it can almost come back to bite us because the price tag of vision often isn't talked about. What is it going to cost?
True. Yeah, so true.
And spiritual warfare as well. I don't remember hearing a lot of honest talking about what is the nature of spiritual warfare, what can it look like, and how it can come. And I don't remember in leadership, especially as we got more into leadership. Now I'm rambling a little bit, so let me slow down. I would say family life, if I could do it all over, would have set more boundaries and maybe just lowered my goals a bit to and maybe try to be a little bit more realistic. Well, definitely to set more boundaries and to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and here's the parameters.
Right.
I'm not going to sacrifice. So we say as cross-cultural workers, we're some of the worst people at breaking one of the 10 commandments, which is keep the Sabbath day. Well, we don't keep the Sabbath day,
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I think prioritizing my family and making sure I'd have taken time for more breaks.
Yeah.
That would be a lesson, definitely. And I'm saying to younger leaders, make more time for your kids.
Good. Good.
Because the work is just never ending. It always is more. Yeah.
You never hear someone in reflecting on their experience, whether that, some kind of full-time ministry or work, saying, I regret spending too much time with my family and not enough in the ministry or the work. It's usually the other way around. And it's just like you said, that vision can be like the analogy there, a tiger by the tail, just letting that drive you to the point, of neglecting other areas. So couldn't agree with you more there. And I think I would agree with that totally, Dave, in terms of my own experience. Wish I would have, boundaries were always important. And I think in that culture, in Central Asian culture, so many of us had an open door policy, just because that's the culture there. I mean, there's a private space, personal space is just not even on the radar, And so I think that just, okay, but to stay healthy and sustainable long-term, how can I still be part of life there in that culture, but also take care of my family? Good. For me, another one was language learning. Just, I always wish I would have done more, gone deeper with language learning and history too. I love history. I'm kind of learning that during my middle half of life here, how much I enjoy history. But back then I didn't really give it enough thought and reflection on the history, what led a people, a country to this place and time, to this, and how does that relate how does that relate to the opportunity that exists now? So I think just a student of culture, a student of history, for me, I wish I would have done more of that. Yep.
I 100% agree on the language thing too. I mean, I think when we think of priorities in terms of where do we make sure, I mean, I remember talking with you when we were in a leadership team together, we were trying to make space for people that, as best we could to navigate that. How do you make sure people are getting time? Because we all have this desire to get active and get busy and say we're accomplishing something. And it doesn't feel like you're doing much. I mean, I remember one friend of mine who had learned 3 or 4 languages. And I said, well, do you just feel you have a gift for this? And he said, no way. He goes, I said, language learning is like digging ditches for a living. You're just plodding into it. But, back to the prioritizing of things in our worlds, I think the tension of our vision, and so I'm not going to go on too much about it, but because when you're young, when we have younger and we're idealistic and we've got vision and we want to, we start dreaming big, and oh my goodness, I just tell you, this is funny. I recently had a guy come to Iran as a worker there. And he came in and he said, I've been praying for 10 years and I'm just ready to come and die for Jesus. And I looked at him, I said, why don't you just try living for Jesus first? It's okay, But seriously, it's, I'm for just how do we keep good priorities?
Yeah.
And this, things like spiritual rhythm. How do I keep the basics in my spiritual life?
Yeah.
That it doesn't, because I found myself, Tim, sometimes willing to sacrifice, willing to give, and slowly I found my own personal life getting squeezed out. My own
right. Yep. No, totally, Dave. I agree with that. And so what has helped you, and maybe it's something you've learned post being on the field, or maybe something there, but what has helped you, maybe a practice or a resource that you would point people to that has helped you kind of stay in the game, sustainable spiritual life and vitality?
Well, I think, I mean, some of the things we're talking about right now, it's not that I wasn't aware at all. So,
Right.
I mean, I just reflecting and saying, I wish I'd done it
Yeah.
more. So, I mean, the practice of a daily quiet time,
Hmm.
daily devotion, prioritizing prayer, reading scripture, for me, that was always there all those years. Um, but I just think, so in a sense, I look back and say, when the times really were tough, when it was the hardest, it was always coming back to Jesus, always back to the
Mm,
Word of God in prayer.
yeah.
So that was, my Psalm 91. So that discipline of going back, I think a group of, the other thing was our team life to some degree.
Hmm.
One of the things that was so key for my survival was we pulled together as a leadership team, and we had a few of us standing together, not trying to do this alone.
Right.
And so I think that community, to whatever degree we can have some kind of team life, some kind of community
Yeah.
that we're a part of, that it's not lone rangers, I'm out there on my own, and to
Hmm.
some degree accountable to other people, that helped us definitely was a survival
Good. Good.
mechanism. The other thing was for me, I reached out for help. So, I mean, I think I realized pretty soon after being out there together that we were pretty isolated and alone. And unless we found mentors and coaches and either tried to bring them in, I wish I had done that more and got more and intentional coaching, mentoring, built that into my life, as well as maybe into our DNA
Mm,
of recognizing how valuable that would be
it's
for
good.
us.
Yeah.
It wasn't a part of our culture back then. It's something more and
Right.
more.
Right.
I think more these days we're all recognizing this, but I don't remember hearing much about that when we were out there initially. So
Yeah, I don't either. But I do recall, Dave, being intentional around some of those areas, inviting, guest speakers to come in, have some days of just extended team community connection, whether that was through the international church there or part of the team. One thing that helped us survive was you inviting us into a team, because we were the first ones in our organization to come into the country. So one of the things, was just being invited into a team where there is that accountability, there's that connection, fellowship, and like-minded support around things, because you can get to feeling really isolated. And then
yeah.
you and Pam were our first mentors. Couple, there were just a handful, just a few married couples, that were there as global workers in that time. And there were a lot of more singles coming out, which we love too. But there's something about being able to connect with and be mentored by married couples, And so we vividly remember some of our conversations in your Hovely. You introduced us to canned evap milk for coffee, because I don't know, you must have got that on a container or put it in your, because you couldn't find it in the bare shelf stores there. But we realized next time we're going back to the States, we're going to get some canned evap milk for our coffee. Then we discovered, wow, we can get great village coffee or milk from the village. So yeah, but all those things were significant conversations and connections. Here's a reminiscing. Here's a funny.
Okay.
Remember the Fruit Loops that came in on the container?
Oh, I do. Yes.
So we used to get these containers with the NGO, right? With
Yeah.
CATA at that time, then Operation Mercy. But these containers would come in, and you never know sometimes what you'd get, right? And someone loaded up a couple pallets of Fruit Loops, right? And our kids
I mean,
just
you were
OD'd on Fruit
running.
Loops for a while. What?
Yeah, you were running that whole relief operation.
Yeah, exactly. And I looked
all
and
the
yeah, I was running the relief. So we were like shocked to see that someone thought that Fruit Loops might be a good relief item for a country going through civil war and trying to come back. But we found ways to utilize even things like that. But
yeah, I know it was something else. What you would. But it was that like the box of chocolates. You didn't know what you're going to
you
get.
didn't know what you're going to get. That's right. And we got
Um,
Yep. One year we got, right after turn of the century, Y2K, we got cans and cans of these dehydrated beans and soup mixes and all that stuff. Now, some of that was actually good for the villages that we were doing relief work in. So,
And that continued. I mean, what you had started continued for quite a long time and helped hundreds. I think it was hundreds of thousands of people there.
Yeah, and even went into northern Afghanistan at times.
And northern
after 9/11. Yeah.
9/11.
So, yeah. No. Yeah.
I think of another thing is, I guess it's what I'm going to call spiritual warfare. I remember, and it's, on the one sense, and it's still something when I think about continuing to learn about, is maybe it's to say more realistic about the human factor, our humanity, how much we are in process of, use the word sanctification and becoming more like Christ. I like what somebody said, wherever two or three are gathered in my name, there's a mess. Okay, so it's kind of like the reality that with all of the training, with all the things, and kind of what I'm going into, but the reality that there's a spiritual warfare, and I think it's still an ongoing thing to realize Satan is out there, very real, trying to attack and get in. And how does he attack? I mean, it's this book, one of the books that we just translated into Farsi and we're distributing for pastors, called "Surviving Friendly Fire" by Ronald Dunn. And he was a pastor of pastors, traveling all over consulting, and he basically wrote this book out of this the pain of seeing how Satan can get into churches, the way Satan could attack.
Right.
And I just recently saw on Focus on the Family that it was research they did that 78% of pastors in the U.S. are fired at least twice in their careers, and none of it's for moral issues. It's board conflicts, it's conflicts with staff.
Yeah.
It's all these other sort of things, and then 80% of pastors, and I don't know about cross-cultural workers, are just quitting.
Yeah.
And I think to have better preparation to know what is a spiritual warfare going to look like, what are the challenges going to be there, and be ready, be a little bit more ready for it.
That's good. Good.
To how do we deal with conflict? How do we kind of try to do as best we can to manage? Because I know this is the thing, is in cross-cultural stress, which I know you guys are more than aware of, what happens to us. And depending on our backgrounds and the baggage we have. And in some ways, it can become like just enough stress, and it becomes traumatic stress.
Right.
And in so many of our places, like Tajikistan, I remember we had a consultant come out. You probably remember, I can't remember if you were there then, Howard Norris, this guy, Howard came out. And I asked him, I said, just go around and meet all of our staff, see what's going on. What do you think? And he came back. He said, well, I got good news and bad news. I said, what's that? He goes, well, 50% of your staff have signs of PTSD. And I remember looking and saying, what's PTSD? I had no training or idea.
Right.
But here we were in a conflict zone, and I just think, that whole area of how can we manage and help people through incredible, difficult situations that they're not prepared for, and then the spiritual warfare that can come in the middle of it. So
that's good. Yeah. That's good. That's a huge part of carving out a sustainable, just life, and surviving, not just surviving, but thriving, and also a sustainable ministry. So, super important. And we're getting ready to wrap up here, but let me ask you this: what's there? This is an interesting question that has been posed to us, both my wife and I, several times. So I thought I'd ask you, since you've been in more than one country and lived in more than one country, and but what do you do as a global worker when you love your first country, don't really like your second country, and you definitely don't really like your third country. Is there something about that first country? It could go the other way, I guess. The first place is not a good fit. So what's your experience, and what would you counsel or just kind of help people to get perspective around that?
Wow, it's an interesting question.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And I'm curious, to have a broader discussion with others who've had this happen. But I don't know, in one sense, there's a part of me that thinks, okay, just to throw it in here, that it's the ministry of the Holy Spirit to enable me to develop love and passion for wherever I go. And saying that in the context, like when we were in Tajikistan, so this is my true confession now, I never liked Russians. Okay, this is terrible. I had to repent. My God, please forgive me. I know, help me to have your love for the Russian people. And I think in any country that I've been in, whether it was India or Bangladesh or Pakistan or Tajikistan, that there's things that I didn't like. Some things about culture,
right,
that I learned, but I've worked to keep a positive attitude and sort of separate the people from, blanketly allowing myself to get into a negative frame of mind. So, right on there with the language learning and the whole idea of bonding with people, that to the degree we can really bond and learn to love and experience life from the way people experience and see it, was kind of a modus operandi, a part of our philosophy all these years. So whether it was India or in any of these other places, it was like, how do we learn to love and see things the way these guys do who live here? Because they love this country. It's their home, and they have vision for it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, there is this thing of cultural intelligence I'm going to throw in. I wish 20 years ago, we weren't even talking about it, and there wasn't some of the tools and resources like we have now. But I think the training and materials and resources that are there, right in there with the language learning and working at having a better experience of cross-cultural learning that takes me to a deeper level in what we're calling cultural intelligence. So one of the resources is Knowledge Works out of Dubai, and they have some assessment tools that's different than David Livermore with his thing in California. Those are resources that I think would be useful as reflective tools for at a different level in going into the cross-cultural experience. And the only other thing is Chuck Swindoll. I mean, this great quote said, life is 80%, only 10 or 20% about what happens to me. It's 80% at how my attitude is in responding. So
isn't that true? Yeah. So true. Good. Say that again, Dave. Swindoll's quote.
Yeah. Chuck Swindoll, he said that life is like 10% what happens to me, 90% my attitude and response to it.
Yeah.
I can't do anything about the negative things, but I can choose to not allow myself to get negative.
Good. I like that. And so some of this just really goes around being a student. Again, I think I hear you saying being a student of language and culture, wherever you go, wherever God sends us, is a way to begin to grow an appreciation. And that may be harder. In the example that I gave, it may be harder for some people because in some ways we feel like we have to reject the old or the place we were at where we have roots and embrace something new. And to an extent we do, but that's part of our history. That's not something we don't have to, we have to give up completely. But I think that, just like you said, engaging, make a friend, learn something new about the culture. I know when we moved to Turkey after 16 years in Tajikistan, it was culture shock all over again for us, and at first I didn't want to really engage. I didn't want to even try to learn a new language, let alone make a friend. And so it took time. And it took me learning to appreciate what some amazing history and culture. So I kind of started there, just learning learn a little bit of the history and the culture, and then the friendships and the relationships came later, and the appreciation grew. But but I think that's all good advice, and helpful for those especially for those who are transitioning to new places. I think a lot of people are right now with COVID and rug pulled out transitions and having to relocate and different things. Just a real good encouragement to find ways to appreciate even places we don't necessarily wasn't our first choice, or we don't necessarily want to be there at the time, but there's always something to get, a lesson to be learned or something to be gained in that, for sure.
And the minister, and I really meant it without trying to be super spiritual, that the Holy Spirit, there's the capacity, God can do something in us. I just don't have it in myself. And that there is that element. I think that but at the same time, there's things, I don't want to adjust to. They're and if we got into it, it's another discussion, how women are treated out in that part of the world, for example. Is something we always kind of graded.
There's that's a whole nother, that's definitely that could be a part 2 here, discussion, I think, because that's there's certain things, obviously, are ways, there's unhealthy ways of embrace when we just kind of automatically embrace everything. Even the things that are unhealthy. So yes, good. This has been great, Dave. We're going to sign off, but again, thanks for being my friend and mentors, you and Pam, and for the example you set, for the way that you led, and the road that you paved with God's help to get us to get a work established and get and provide a place where people like us, the newbies, could come and join in the work. And so just thankful for you and Pam, and hope to be able to have some face-to-face time in the near future. The door's always open, as they would say in Tajikistan. Okay.
Thank you, Tim. And I just want to say, it was a great privilege and honor to be co-workers with you guys. And you were great examples, great partners. And I've talked about you guys in many, many different contexts. So I really appreciate your kingdom heart, kingdom vision, and willingness to put your hand to the plow and share the burden and what we could do together. The Lord knows, in eternity. But thank you.
Thank you, Dave. All right. We'll talk to you later.
Okay. Give our love to Eve.
Okay.
God bless.
Likewise. Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Vision, when left untamed, can have a way of crowding out our enjoyment of the simple things in life. It can become the sabotager of relationships, drying up an otherwise fruitful life. Church planners can face this, entrepreneurs struggle with this, just about anyone with ambition. When we were still living in Tajikistan, my wife and I taught a course for national believers on Christian family. One of the assignments was to create a personal family vision statement. My wife and I completed the exercise along with our students, and that exercise gave us and our Tajik students a reminder that there is life beyond the work. There are other priorities that we must juggle with the vision. Better yet, there is a way to expand the vision outside of the tunnel of work and ministry. What's your vision today? Does it feel like a tiger by the tail? If so, could it be time for a reset? What's important, and how can I expand the vision in order to live with no regrets? Working with a coach is a great way to move forward and toward a greater life-work balance while keeping the vision alive. Book a discovery call with me at encompasslifecoaching.com to explore coaching opportunities in the new year. That's a wrap for today. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Navigate. If this has been helpful to you, would you mind rating the podcast, writing a review, and sharing on social media? And of course, you can always subscribe so that you're sure to get in on the next episode. Until next time.